So last two videos in fact, we've been talking about clefs and how to read on the staff pitches, which are up and down, or highs and lows, different measurements of the sound. In this particular video, we're going to talk about intervals, which is the space in between two notes. So when we think about, to a quick review, our clefs and what they tell us, we know that we have our lines and spaces on the treble clef staff, our E, G, B, D, F, and F, A, C, E. In our bass clef staff, we have our G, B, D, F, A, and A, C, E, G for our spaces. So it's important that we keep those in mind, that the treble clef and bass clef staff give different names to the lines and spaces on a staff. When we're thinking about intervals, though, the interval doesn't matter what the letter name is. It matters how far apart they are. So an interval in music is the distance between two notes on a staff. And for the purposes of this discussion, a melodic interval is going to be the distance between two notes that don't happen at the same time. So they're played one at a time. And a harmonic interval is two notes that happen at the same time. That means they played exactly at the same time, but they're stacked on top of each other. So when we look at melodic intervals, from one line to one space, as exampled here, is called a second. This is a whole step in space because there's no flats or sharps in between these particular notes, something we'll talk about a little later. When we're thinking of this second, this third, there's a note in between. Fourth, 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this is important to note that the name of the interval is not how many notes there are in between. It's the notes that you would count when starting from your first note. So if you start on your first note, here's your first note, this is your second. Here's your first note, second, third. So the intervals are named from counting from where you're starting, the bottom of the two notes, to the note above it. So if we start here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we get a fifth. Okay, etc., etc. It's pretty easy to figure out when they're melodic intervals because you can just count up the lines and spaces. If I were to start on the middle line, which in this treble clef part would be a B, and go B up to the space for C, up to the line for D, I've counted 1, 2, 3, boom, it's the third. Now when you have a harmonic interval, it gets to be a little bit more complicated because their notes are stacked on top of each other. But all you really have to do is to continue to count up. So if we start on the C, as it's written here in the bass clef, the very next thing up is the line for D. Well, there's no notes in between there, ignoring sharps and flats for the moment. There's no notes in between there, so that makes it a second. We go from C to D, second. Or from C to E, and there's a line in between where the D would go, so that makes it a third. 1, 2, 3, etc., etc., etc. Okay? If the two notes are exactly the same, then we have a unison. So two notes in exactly the same spot are a unison because there's no space in between them. And then for special terms for music, when we get up to the interval of an eighth, we call that an octave. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, our eighth note, okay, that space is an octave. Now why would that be special? If you think back to the way we did our musical alphabet before, you ought to be able to come up with this answer. That's right, because there's only 7 letters in our musical alphabet. So if we have C, then D, E, F, G, A, B, the octave is where the letters start over again. So an octave is always going to be 8 notes apart, and the letters will always be the same, even though they will sound differently. Okay, so think through the difference between these. Is this one melodic or harmonic? If the notes happen at the same time, are they stacked on top of each other or not? That's right, melodic. And then it gets simpler to figure out from there. Melodic. And then this looks different. The notes line up vertically. So when they're stacked on top of each other, with the exception of a second, they're always going to be lined up exactly like this. Now a second just for the ease of reading, they have to scoot one of them to the side. Understand that this second right here happens harmonically. This happens at the same time. If you were to have a keyboard in front of you, you would play F and G and push down those two buttons at the exact same time. So a melodic interval, there's going to be more space in between. When there's a second involved, they have to kind of squish them up together. So now let's look at these intervals. Okay, very straightforward. Unison is the same. You always go from the bottom up, just like we do our staff names. Now, there will be, when we get into some more complicated stuff with chords, there'll be some reasons why that still works, but we have to think about it a slightly different way. For the purposes of this introduction to intervals, start from the bottom up. So if we start here on this B, what is the distance from the B to the D? How do we get from here to there? That's right, it's a third. This one's a little bit trickier. You have to think G, A, B, C, D, E, and then you get to F. So G to F is a what? That's right, it's the seventh. Now I encourage you to go ahead and pause the video here and go through the other intervals on your own, figuring out exactly what the space in between each one of them is. And remember, for the purposes of this introduction, we start from the lower one, whether the lower one is first or second, and count up. Excellent. So let's move on to these harmonic intervals. Now they didn't provide us a cool little example one on this, so we're just going to have to do this on our own. Starting on the C, how do we get to the E that's written there for bass clef? C, and then what comes above C that's going to be on this line? That's right, D, and then E. So this is a third. What about this one? We're starting on D, D, E, F, G, A, B. So we're going from D to B. That's right, it's a sixth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, this one's one of our special cases, so you ought to be able to recognize it instantaneously as a second. And this is another one of our special cases. It's a unison, because they're the same. They're on the same spot. And then we have F, G, A, B. So F to B is what? That's right, a fourth. So once again, pause, finish them out on your own if you'd like. But we're going to move forward because this is pretty self-explanatory once you get the basic idea of it, that you're counting from your starting note to your upper note to get the name of the interval. So if we're thinking here about line number 4, and we want to do a fifth, we have to go C, D, E, F, G to the fifth. Now you may have noticed some patterns, okay, by now, at least I kind of hope you have, and that is an interval that is oddly named is going to be on the same, as long as it's still in the staff, is going to be on the same thing that the note you started on. So for instance, this is a fifth, which is 5 is an odd number, and we're in a space, so that means it has to be in a space. Now eventually, if you keep going up way, way, way up, it'll switch back around. But for the purposes of right now, if it's on a space and it's odd, the answer has to be on a space. If it's on a line and it's odd, the answer has to be on the line. So even if you didn't take the time to count, where would this third go? Where should I stack it on top of? Right here? No, because it's odd, it has to go on a line since the bottom number is on a line. We already know that a fifth is 2 spaces up or 2 lines up, so a third stacks right there. Now, if the number is even, and we're still dealing with the simple intervals like this, let's skip over here to this fourth. Okay? If you're on a space, it will become on a line. If you're on a line, it'll become on a space. So if we have this F right here, F, G, A, B is how we get to our fourth. So this is a space, this is a line. So even intervals will alternate spaces and lines. Odd intervals will be the same space and line as you stack them up. So let's jump down here and do one of these. Let's do a sixth. Going from this G, where do I need to put the sixth? Do I put it right here? Do I put it right here? Do I put it right here? Or do I put it here? Think about what you know. Either count your way up, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, okay, to the right number, or figure it out based on alternating. Is it even? Is it odd? And if you were thinking to yourself, E, in that fourth space, you are in the exact right spot. What about an odd one? The fifth from this B. Where do I need to put this note for it to be in the right spot? Do I put it here? Do I put it down here? What about right there? Well, hopefully, as it's starting to make sense to you, you can see B, C, D, E, F is our fifth note. Thinking through the counting of what I just said. So let's put this into a couple of measures that we can look at slightly differently. Because those were all that I just did harmonic intervals, which are wonderful and important. But let's do a couple of melodic ones. Starting on this G again. If I want to do a fourth, where do I need to put this note? Now, I'm not going to stack them on top because it's melodic. This note's going to happen at a different time. Do I put it here? Do I put it here? So if you thought through and counted through it, G, A, B, C, that's the fourth note. And here's the interval of a fourth. Now each one of these intervals has a specific sound to our ears when we hear them. Hopefully that triggers something, whether it's I've been working on the railroad, or the University of Texas song, or that there's some kind of thing in your brain that when you hear this space, you start to think, oh, I've heard that before. Because these intervals, especially when we think about them melodically, are what we build a lot of our music on. That and scales, which will be a source of another video later on. So let's do a different interval. Let's do a sixth. So if this is our A in treble clef, where would I need to put my note to be a sixth? Well, if you've been thinking about your interval spacing and lines and spaces, you know that odd intervals are on the spaces. So that's a third, that's a fifth, then all I have to do is go up one more to get to six, because even intervals will be different lines and spaces as long as they're in the staff. So let's hear how this sounds differently. So if I listen to those back to back, you can hear the wider space as it's shown on the staff. The sixth is farther away. We had to count more numbers than the fourth was. Let's do one more. How about a fifth? Starting here. F. Actually, let's do it in bass clef, even better. Just so we can get some more practice with bass clef. So I'll switch my clef to bass, which changes the names of, whoops, clicked the wrong one, which changes the names of the letters. So now I've got an A. Where would my fifth be? Well, if you're thinking about your stacking, you just know you go up 2 spaces. And you have the space of a fifth, which also sounds different. Sounds like the bass line to a lot of songs you may have heard. So as you listen to those again, you can hear that there's a difference in the space of the intervals. So that's what we're doing. We're giving name to the space up and down between pitches. Fourth, sixth, and then finally our fifth. So that's the basic introduction to intervals. We're going to get into a little bit more detail when we start adding sharps and flats and talk about half steps and whole steps in the next video.